The morning I heard my future son-in-law say, "Once we're married, she'll stop asking so many questions." I nearly missed a red light on Interstate 670. For a second, I thought I'd heard him wrong. I glanced in the rearview mirror. Ryan Mercer was sitting in the back seat of my black Lincoln Continental, looking out the window like he just commented on the weather. Not like he'd casually described changing my daughter's entire life. My hands tightened around the steering wheel. I kept my eyes on the road, kept my mouth shut, and listened. That moment changed everything. "My name is Frank Dawson. I'm 61 years old, and I've lived in Columbus, Ohio my entire life. For 37 years, I worked as an electrical contractor. Long days, early mornings, hard work. The kind of work where nobody cares about your opinions if the lights don't come on when you flip the switch. I retired 2 years ago. At least that was the plan. Turns out, retirement sounded a lot more exciting than it actually was. After 6 months of mowing the lawn, reorganizing my garage, and driving my wife Linda crazy by constantly asking what she wanted to do, I needed something productive. Not because we needed money. I just needed a reason to leave the house. That's how I ended up driving for a private executive transportation company based outside Dublin, Ohio. Mostly business clients. Lawyers, bank executives, consultants, people who traveled constantly and preferred having the same driver whenever possible. The schedule suited me. A few mornings each week, a few airport runs, some corporate transportation. Nothing complicated. The funny thing is, Ryan became one of my regular passengers before I realized who he was. At first, he was just another guy in a suit. Early 30s, expensive watch, always checking emails, always talking on the phone. Then one morning, I heard him say a familiar name, Emily, my daughter. I nearly looked into the mirror so hard I would have driven off the road. Over the next few minutes, pieces started falling into place. The voice, the age, the company, the stories. It was him, Ryan Mercer, my daughter's fiancé, the man she'd be marrying in 5 months. The strange part? He had no idea who I was. To be fair, there were reasons. A few months earlier, I'd started extensive dental implant work. My dentist had recommended I wear a mask during recovery because I was self-conscious about the temporary bridge work. I also wore company-issued sunglasses and a black cap. Most clients barely glanced at me. Ryan certainly didn't. Even when he'd come to family dinners before, he wasn't exactly focused on me. Not because he was rude, at least not openly. He was one of those people who walked into a room and naturally made everything about himself. He remembered stories that made him look good. He remembered accomplishments. He remembered compliments. Other people? Not so much. At first, I actually found the situation entertaining. Every Tuesday and Thursday morning, I'd pick up my future son-in-law and drive him downtown. Meanwhile, he sat 3 feet behind me without the slightest clue he was talking to his future father-in-law. I told Linda about it one evening. She nearly choked on her iced tea. "You're kidding. I wish. You mean he doesn't recognize you?" "Not even a little." She laughed so hard tears formed in her eyes. "Frank, that's terrible. You're smiling. Because it's funny." And honestly, it was, at least in the beginning. The more time I spent around Ryan, though, the more uncomfortable I became. Not because he was openly cruel. That would have been easier. Instead, it was little things. The way he spoke to restaurant servers. The way he interrupted people. The way every conversation somehow drifted back to him. One morning, another executive shared the ride. The man mentioned his daughter's soccer tournament. Ryan immediately redirected the conversation toward his own college athletic career. The other guy barely finished 2 sentences. Ryan never noticed. Or maybe he didn't care. I kept telling myself none of that meant he was a bad person. Plenty of successful people were self-centered. Plenty matured over time. Emily loved him. That mattered. My daughter wasn't naive. She worked as a school counselor. She spent her days helping teenagers navigate complicated emotions and difficult situations. She was smart, kind, independent. After a rough relationship in her 20s, she'd become much more careful about who she trusted, which was why I tried not to judge Ryan too quickly. Then came that Tuesday morning. The morning everything shifted. Rain tapped softly against the windshield as we headed east. Traffic moved slowly. Ryan's phone rang. He answered immediately. "Yeah," he said. A pause. Then a laugh, a long laugh, the kind that made my stomach tighten. "No, seriously. Once we're married, she'll stop asking so many questions." Silence filled the car. I stared straight ahead. Maybe there was context I wasn't hearing. Maybe he was joking. Maybe then he continued. "I know her. She trusts me." My jaw clenched. The voice on the other end said something I couldn't hear. Ryan chuckled again. "Look, right now she's still attached to Columbus, friends, family, work, all that stuff." A pause. Then the sentence that made my blood run cold. "The farther she is from her family, the easier everything becomes." I felt something shift inside me. Not anger, not yet, something worse. Recognition. Because I'd heard words like that before. Years ago. From another man who wanted control more than partnership. A man Emily had eventually left. Ryan kept talking casually, like he was discussing weekend plans. Like he wasn't describing how he intended to reshape someone else's life. By the time we reached his office building, my stomach was in knots. He ended the call, gathered his briefcase, opened the door, then leaned back inside for a second. "See you Thursday." "Yeah, have a good day," I said. My voice sounded normal, somehow. He stepped onto the sidewalk and disappeared into the building. I sat there for several seconds, the engine idling, rain sliding down the windshield, trying to convince myself I was overreacting. Maybe I was. Maybe there was an explanation. Maybe I'd only heard part of the conversation. Then another thought hit me. Ryan hadn't said our plans. He hadn't said Emily and I decided. He hadn't said we. Everything he described had been his decision, his timeline, his future, his strategy. And for the first time, I wondered whether the man my daughter was preparing to marry saw her as a partner at all, or something else entirely. I didn't tell Emily what I'd heard. Not that day, not that week either. For 3 days I carried it around like a stone in my pocket. Every time my phone rang and I saw her name, I almost said something. Every time she texted about wedding plans, I nearly typed it out. Then I'd stop, delete everything, and tell myself to slow down. After 35 years of marriage, Linda knew exactly when something was bothering me. The following Friday evening, we were sitting on our back patio. Nothing fancy, just 2 old Adirondack chairs, a couple glasses of iced tea, and the sound of cicadas coming from the trees behind our fence. She looked over at me. "You still thinking about Ryan?" I sighed. "Maybe I misunderstood. You don't sound convinced. I keep replaying it." Linda set her glass down. "What exactly bothers you?" I stared into the yard. It wasn't what he said. It was how he said it. She nodded. That was exactly it. There hadn't been any hesitation. Guy Clear's throat, no uncertainty, no discussion. Ryan had spoken like Emily's future was already settled. Like she was a passenger in a car he was driving. Linda was quiet for a moment. "Then pay attention," she finally said. "What?" "Pay attention before you start accusing anyone of anything." That was good advice. Probably better than I deserved. Because if I'm being honest, part of me already wanted to hate him. Not because of anything he'd done. Because I was scared. And fear can make a father dangerous. So I decided to watch. Nothing more. Just watch. The next week I picked Ryan up outside his condo near Bridge Park in Dublin. Same routine, dark suit, coffee in hand, phone already pressed against his ear. He slid into the back seat. "Glenn, listen to me," he said before I'd even pulled away. Apparently I wasn't worth greeting. I drove, he talked. The farther we went, the more interesting the conversation became. I already accepted the offer. A pause. Then no, Emily doesn't know yet. I glanced at the mirror. Ryan was staring out the side window. Relaxed, completely unaware. The offer. What offer? A few minutes later I got my answer. Phoenix is perfect. My stomach tightened. Phoenix, Arizona. Over 800 miles from Columbus. Another pause. Then once we're married, moving will make sense. I nearly missed my exit. Not because of anger. Because Emily had never mentioned Phoenix. Not once. That Sunday, she came over for dinner. Like she often did, she brought a pasta salad. Linda made pot roast. The Cincinnati Reds game played quietly on television in the family room. Normal, comfortable. The kind of evening I'd always hoped my daughter would still want after she became an adult. At one point, Emily helped me clear plates from the table. I kept my voice casual. "How's wedding planning?" She smiled. "Busy. I bet. We finally booked the photographer." "That's good." A few seconds passed. Then I asked, "So, what happens after the wedding?" "What do you mean? You staying in Columbus?" She laughed. Of course. That answer hit me harder than I expected. I tried not to react. "Never thought about moving?" She shook her head. "My whole life is here." Then she smiled. "Besides, Ryan loves Ohio." I nearly dropped a dinner plate. That night I couldn't sleep. I lay awake staring at the ceiling fan turning slowly overhead. Around 200 in the morning, Linda rolled over. "Still awake?" "Yep." "You believe her?" "Absolutely." "Then maybe Ryan hasn't told her." Neither of us said anything after that, because we both knew what it meant if he hadn't. The following week I started noticing patterns. Not dramatic things, small things, the kind most people miss. Ryan constantly referred to decisions as if they'd already been made. He'd say things like, "We're buying, we're moving, we're doing this," but never "we've discussed" or "we've decided." One Tuesday morning, he spent nearly 20 minutes on the phone with a real estate agent. He wasn't looking at homes in Ohio. He was discussing neighborhoods in Arizona, school districts, property taxes, commute times, the whole thing. Yet every time Emily visited our house, she talked about the future as if she expected to stay right where she was. Two completely different realities, and only one of them knew it. The situation started eating at me. I found myself distracted, short-tempered. One afternoon, I snapped at Linda over absolutely nothing. 5 minutes later, I apologized. She simply looked at me and said, "You need facts, Frank." She was right. Facts, not assumptions, not fears. Facts. A few days later, I got them. At least the first real piece. Ryan climbed into the car looking irritated. Not angry, frustrated, like someone whose plans weren't moving quickly enough. He immediately called someone. Speakerphone. Again. The man had the privacy instincts of a golden retriever. "Did the attorney finish it?" Ryan asked. A pause. Then he nodded. "Good." More silence. Then, "I don't care if she reads every page." He laughed. A cold little laugh. "The prenup is written exactly how I wanted it." I felt every muscle in my back tighten. Prenup. Emily had never mentioned a prenup. Not once. Maybe she already knew. Maybe she didn't. I kept listening. "The whole point is protecting future assets." Pause. Exactly. Another pause. Then the sentence that stayed with me. "If things don't work out, I won't be walking away with nothing." When he ended the call, my hands felt damp against the steering wheel. I drove another 10 minutes before dropping him off. The moment he left, I pulled into a gas station parking lot. Not because I needed gas, because I needed air. I sat there staring through the windshield, trying to process what I just heard. Moving plans. Hidden job offers. A prenup Emily had never mentioned. Maybe none of it was illegal. Maybe none of it was even immoral. But every piece pointed in the same direction. Ryan wasn't building a future with my daughter. He was building one around her. And for the first time I began wondering whether the wedding itself was only part of a larger plan. A plan Emily hadn't been invited to help create. For about a week after hearing Ryan mention the prenup, I did something I hadn't done in years. I started doubting myself. Not because the facts disappeared, because they were getting harder to interpret. If Ryan had been openly cheating on Emily, things would have been simple. If he'd been stealing money or lying about his identity, that would have been simple too. But this was murkier, more uncomfortable. Because on the surface, Ryan looked like a man planning for his future. The problem was that every future plan seemed to belong to him alone. One rainy Wednesday morning, I picked him up outside his condo a little after 7 p.m. The sky was gray, the sidewalks were wet. Ryan climbed into the back seat carrying a leather portfolio. He seemed unusually cheerful. As we headed toward downtown Columbus, he called Emily. I expected another conversation that would raise my blood pressure. Instead, I heard something entirely different. His voice softened. "Hey, sweetheart." I hadn't heard that version of him before. They talked about dinner plans, a movie, something funny that had happened at her school. Emily laughed. Ryan laughed. And for a moment he sounded genuinely happy. When the call ended, I sat there confused. That was the problem. Ryan wasn't pretending. At least not completely. He cared about her, I was sure of it. Which somehow made everything worse. Because people expect villains to be obvious. Real life doesn't work that way. Sometimes people hurt others while believing they're doing the right thing. That realization stayed with me all day. That evening, I told Linda. She listened quietly while folding laundry in our bedroom. When I finished, she looked up. So, maybe he loves her. I think he does. Then, what's the problem? I sat down on the edge of the bed. The problem is, he thinks he knows what's best for her. Linda stopped folding. Now she understood. We both did. Because we'd seen it before. Not in marriage. In parenting. It's easy to confuse love with control. Easy to start believing your decisions are automatically better than someone else's. Especially when you're convinced you're helping. Ryan wasn't treating Emily like a partner. He was treating her like a project. And projects don't get a vote. A few days later, another piece of the puzzle appeared. Not through spying. Not through secret investigations. Through pure arrogance. Ryan spent nearly 40 minutes on the phone during one ride. The conversation sounded like a strategy meeting. Retirement accounts. Investment structures. Joint assets. Tax advantages. Most of it went over my head. But certain parts didn't. At one point, he said, "Once Emily leaves counseling, we can simplify everything." I nearly looked into the mirror. Leaves counseling? Not if. When? A few minutes later, 2 incomes aren't necessary. Then she worries too much about independence. I felt something heavy settle in my chest. Emily loved her work. She wasn't getting rich doing it. School counselors rarely do. But she cared deeply about those kids. She talked about them constantly. The successes, the struggles, the little victories. Ryan talked about her career like it was a hobby she'd eventually outgrow. That weekend, Emily stopped by again. This time alone. Linda was running errands. For about an hour, it was just the two of us sitting at the kitchen table drinking coffee. I kept telling myself not to push, not to pry. Then I failed. "How's the wedding budget looking?" She smiled. "Pretty good. You keeping separate accounts?" The smile faded slightly. "Dad." "What?" She laughed. "That was random." I shrugged. "Just asking." Emily studied me for a second. Too long. Then she asked, "Is this about Ryan?" My stomach dropped. I tried to play it off, apparently badly, because she immediately crossed her arms. "What is going on with you lately?" "Nothing, Dad. I'm just being careful." "About what?" I hesitated. Big mistake. Emily saw it instantly. Her expression changed. Not defensive. "You don't trust him." I opened my mouth, then closed it, because there wasn't a good answer. She shook her head. "I knew it, Emily." "No." Her voice cracked slightly. "He's been nothing but good to me." I stared down at my coffee. "Maybe." The second the word left my mouth, I regretted it. Emily pushed her chair back. "Not dramatically. Just enough. You know what hurts?" I looked up. She looked exhausted. "Every time something good happens in my life, you start waiting for it to fall apart." That one landed. Hard. Because there was some truth in it. Not all of it, but enough. The conversation ended badly. Of worse than badly. By the time left, neither of us felt heard. For the next 12 days, she barely answered my calls. Those were some of the longest days I'd had in years. Linda tried to reassure me. Didn't help much. Every morning, I kept driving Ryan. Every evening, I wondered if I'd already ruined my relationship with my daughter. Then, just when I was considering giving up entirely, fate handed me something I couldn't ignore. Ryan got into the car on a Thursday afternoon looking excited, almost giddy. The second he sat down, he called someone. "Everything's booked." Pause. Then, a laugh. "No, she still doesn't know." I felt my pulse quicken. The call continued, and within 30 seconds, I understood why. Ryan had reserved a ballroom at Brookside Golf and Country Club. A large engagement celebration. Nearly 100 guests. Family, friends, co-workers. Everyone important in their lives. Then came the part that made my stomach turn. Ryan planned to use the event to announce their move to Arizona, publicly, in front of everyone, without discussing it with Emily first. He described it as a surprise, a gift, a grand romantic gesture. I gripped the steering wheel harder because I finally understood something. This wasn't about money. It wasn't about cheating. It wasn't even about deception. Ryan genuinely believed he had the right to make life-changing decisions for someone else. And if I was going to stop this wedding, I needed more than suspicion. I needed proof Emily couldn't ignore. As Ryan stepped out of the car that afternoon, he smiled. For the first time all week, completely confident, completely certain, and completely unaware that his own plan had just given me the opportunity I'd been searching for. For the first time since this whole mess started, I had something concrete. Not proof that Ryan was a criminal, not proof that he was cheating. Something far more useful. A pattern. A pattern of making major decisions for Emily without ever treating her like an equal partner. The challenge was figuring out what to do with it, now because simply telling her wasn't going to work. I'd already tried pushing. That conversation at my kitchen table had proved exactly how badly that could backfire. The harder I pushed, the more she defended him. And honestly, I couldn't blame her. If someone had criticized Linda before we got married, I probably would have done the same thing. People don't like being told they're wrong about someone they love. They have to discover it themselves. A few days later, I met an old friend for breakfast. His name was Gary Wallace. Retired Columbus police detective. We'd known each other almost 30 years. The kind of friend who doesn't say much unless it matters. We met at a little diner off Riverside Drive. Same place we'd been meeting once a month since retirement. Gary listened while I explained everything. The rides, the phone calls, the hidden job offer, the Arizona announcement, the prenup. When I finished, he took a sip of coffee. "You're looking for a smoking gun, maybe. You won't find one." That wasn't the answer I wanted. "What do you mean?" Gary shrugged. "Because guys like this usually aren't criminals." I frowned. "So, what are they?" "They're people who think they're smarter than everyone else." That hit closer to home than I liked. Gary leaned forward. "You don't need proof Ryan is evil." "I'm listening. You need proof Emily isn't getting the full story." Simple, practical. Exactly the kind of advice Gary always gave. As I drove home, I realized he was right. This wasn't about destroying Ryan. It was about exposing the truth. Nothing more, nothing less. The next few weeks became a balancing act. Every morning I drive Ryan downtown. Every evening I debate whether I was doing the right thing. Some days I felt justified. Other days I felt like a sneaky old man spying on his daughter's fiancé. I hated that feeling. More than once I considered quitting the driving job altogether. Then Ryan would climb into the back seat and remind me why I couldn't. One Tuesday morning he spent 20 minutes talking about Emily's future. Not with Emily. With a colleague. "She'll thank me eventually." I remember that sentence clearly. Because people who say things like that usually aren't listening to anyone except themselves. A few minutes later he added, "Honestly, she worries too much about being independent." I nearly laughed. Not because it was funny. Because Emily had spent her entire adult life being independent. She bought her own car, paid off her student loans, worked through graduate school. Ryan talked about independence like it was some temporary phase she'd eventually outgrow. The more he talked, the clearer everything became. He wasn't trying to hurt her. That would have been easier to expose. He genuinely believed his plans were better than hers, and that belief made him dangerous. One morning, something happened that almost made me lose my composure. Ryan climbed into the car unusually cheerful. As we headed toward downtown, he suddenly started talking to me. Actually talking. For the first time in months. "Married?" he asked. I almost laughed. The man had spent half a year sitting behind me, and only now noticed I existed. 35 years. Wow, he nodded. "Any advice?" For a second I considered telling him exactly what I thought. Instead I said, "Listen more than you talk," he chuckled. "That's it? Worked for me." Ryan smiled politely. Then spent the next 15 minutes talking about himself. I had to bite the inside of my cheek to keep from laughing. When I told Linda that story later, she nearly fell off the couch. "You're kidding." "I wish." "After 6 months?" 6 months. She shook her head. "Frank, if this wasn't so serious, it'd be hilarious." The truth was, there were moments that were funny. Ryan treated me like furniture, like part of the vehicle. He'd discuss business deals, vacation plans, arguments, private conversations, all in front of the one person he should have been careful around. His future father-in-law. The irony would have been unbelievable if I hadn't lived it. As the engagement celebration approached, I began quietly gathering documentation. Nothing illegal, nothing complicated, just facts. I verified the Phoenix job offer, confirmed the ballroom reservation, tracked timelines, compared dates, collected emails Emily had shown us over the months. By themselves, none of those things meant much. Together they told a story. A story Ryan never intended anyone to see. Meanwhile, Emily and I remained distant. Not completely estranged, but different, careful, polite. Every conversation felt like walking across thin ice. That hurt more than I expected. One evening, Linda found me sitting alone in the garage. I wasn't doing anything, just sitting, thinking. She walked over and leaned against the workbench. "You miss her?" I nodded. "Yeah." Linda was quiet, then she said, "Whatever happens next, make sure you're doing it for Emily." "I am." "No." She shook her head gently. "Make sure you're not doing it because you're angry." That stopped me cold. Because the truth was, I was angry. Not just at Ryan, at myself. For not knowing sooner. For letting things get this far. For potentially losing my daughter's trust. Linda squeezed my shoulder, then went back inside. And I sat there for another 20 minutes thinking about what she'd said. The next morning, Ryan got into the car carrying a garment bag. He looked excited. Nervous, too. The engagement celebration was less than 24 hours away. As we approached his office, he glanced up from his phone. "Big day tomorrow. That's what I hear." He grinned. "Biggest day of my life so far." I kept my eyes on the road. "I hope it goes well." "Oh, it will." The confidence in his voice was absolute. Then he laughed. "You know my fiancé has no idea what's coming?" My grip tightened slightly on the steering wheel. No, she didn't, but neither did he. When we reached the curb, Ryan opened the door, then paused. For some reason, he looked directly at me. Godclear's throat really looked. Maybe for the first time, not enough to recognize me, just enough to acknowledge I was another human being. "Thanks, Frank." The sound of my own name coming from him felt strange. I nodded. "You're welcome." He stepped out onto the sidewalk, straightened his jacket, and headed toward the office building. Tomorrow he planned to unveil his perfect future. Tomorrow I planned to let Emily see exactly who had designed it. The engagement celebration was held on a Saturday evening at Brookside Golf and Country Club. A warm June night, clear skies, perfect weather. The kind of evening people remember for all the right reasons. Or at least that was the plan. Linda and I arrived a little before 6 Male. The parking lot was already filling up. Inside the ballroom looked beautiful. White tablecloths, fresh flowers, soft lighting. A string quartet played near the entrance. Someone had spent a lot of money putting the whole thing together. Emily looked happy. That was the hardest part. When we walked in, she came straight over and hugged us. For a moment she was 10 years old again. The same smile, the same warmth, the same trust, and I almost lost my nerve. Almost, because as much as I wanted to protect her from pain, I couldn't protect her from reality. Not anymore. The evening started normally. People mingled. Servers carried trays of appetizers. Guests laughed and shared stories. Ryan moved through the room like a politician working a campaign event, shaking hands, making jokes, collecting compliments. Several times I caught him glancing toward the small stage near the front of the ballroom, waiting, preparing, building toward his big moment. Around 7:30, everyone began taking their seats. The room settled. Forks stopped clinking. Conversations faded. Ryan stepped onto the stage holding a champagne glass. The crowd applauded. Emily stood beside him, smiling, completely unaware. Ryan thanked everyone for coming. Then he launched into a polished speech. The man was good, I'd give him that. He talked about family, commitment, building a future together. He thanked Emily, thanked both families, thanked his co-workers. People nodded along. A few guests even dabbed their eyes. Then he reached the part he'd been waiting for, his surprise. "I've always believed life rewards bold decisions," he said. The room grew quiet. Ryan smiled at Emily. "I wanted tonight to be unforgettable." Emily laughed softly. What did you do? A few people chuckled. Ryan turned back toward the crowd, then announced it. Emily and I are excited to begin our next chapter together in Phoenix, Arizona. Applause erupted instantly. At first. Then it started fading, because Emily wasn't clapping. She wasn't smiling. She wasn't moving. She looked confused, genuinely confused, Ryan noticed. His smile wavered, just slightly. Enough for me to see it. Emily leaned closer. What are you talking about? The microphone picked it up. The room became very still. Ryan laughed nervously. The move! What move? A few guests exchanged glances. Ryan tried again. The job opportunity. Emily stared at him. Then came 4 words that changed the entire evening. What job opportunity? Silence. Absolute silence. You could have heard someone drop a spoon. The clear's throat. Ryan looked around the room. For the first time all night, he seemed unsure of himself. That was my moment. I stood, slowly, no dramatic speech, no shouting, no scene. Just a 61-year-old father standing beside a banquet table. Ryan looked toward me, then looked again. This time longer. Much longer. I watched recognition begin forming behind his eyes. Not fully, just enough. Like a puzzle piece sliding into place. The voice, the face, the name. His expression changed. Frank? I nodded. Yeah, his face lost color. A few guests looked confused. Emily looked even more confused. Ryan opened his mouth. Nothing came out. I spoke calmly. Emily, before anyone makes another announcement, I think there are a few questions worth asking. Nobody interrupted. Not even Ryan. Questions about what? Emily asked quietly. I looked at her. Not him. Always her. When did Ryan tell you he accepted a job in Arizona? Emily turned toward Ryan. He said nothing. That answer spoke loudly enough. I continued. When did he tell you he'd already researched neighborhoods? No response. When did he tell you he'd started planning your relocation? Still nothing. The room felt frozen. Ryan finally stepped forward. Frank, this isn't the place. I looked at him. Really? That landed harder I intended. A few people shifted uncomfortably. Emily folded her arms. Her voice was calm now. Too calm. When were you planning to tell me? Ryan swallowed. I was going to. When? No answer. The silence stretched. Ryan tried changing directions. It was supposed to be a surprise. Emily shook her head. A surprise vacation is a surprise. The room remained completely still. She continued. Moving me across the country isn't. I could see panic beginning to appear behind Ryan's eyes. The confident speaker from 15 minutes earlier was disappearing, all fast. I reached into my jacket pocket and handed Emily several printed documents. Nothing secret, nothing illegal. Copies of information I'd verified over the previous month. Job offer details. Housing research. Planning timelines. Dates. Facts. Emily looked through them slowly, page after page, each one telling the same story, a future designed without her involvement. Ryan started talking, trying to explain, trying to justify, trying to reframe. But the more he spoke, the worse it became, because every explanation revealed the same thing. He hadn't asked, he hadn't discussed, he had decided. Finally, Emily looked up. There were tears in her eyes, but not the kind I'd expected. Not heartbreak, clarity, the painful kind. You kept calling it our future. Ryan opened his mouth. She didn't let him speak. But every decision belonged to you. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. Then Emily slipped the engagement ring from her finger, slowly, carefully. She placed it in Ryan's hand. The room seemed to stop breathing. I loved you, she said quietly. I know, Ryan answered. For the first time all evening, he sounded sincere. Maybe he was. Emily nodded. I believe that. Then she looked directly at him. But you never respected me. Those words hit harder than anything else that night. Because they were true, Ryan wasn't a monster. He wasn't a criminal. He wasn't even pretending to love her. The problem was simpler and sadder. He loved being in charge more than he loved being a partner. 10 minutes later, he walked out alone. No shouting, no security, no dramatic ending. Just a man carrying the weight of his own choices. The weeks afterward weren't easy. Emily was hurt, embarrassed, angry. Some of that anger landed on me. Fairly, if I'm being honest. Healing takes time. Trust does too. But slowly things improved. 6 months later, she enrolled in a graduate certification program she'd been considering for years. She bought a small townhouse outside Columbus. Nothing fancy, just hers. And for the first time in a long while, she seemed excited about the future again. One Sunday afternoon, she came over for dinner, just like old times. As we cleaned dishes afterward, she looked at me and smiled. "You know, Dad." "What?" "You were annoying," I laughed. "Only annoying? Extremely annoying, that's fair." She bumped my shoulder, then added, "But thank you. That was enough. More than enough." Looking back, I've realized something. For most of my life, I thought protecting my daughter meant solving problems for her. It doesn't. Sometimes it means showing someone the truth and trusting them to decide what comes next. If you've ever faced a moment where telling the truth risked damaging a relationship, then you probably know how hard that choice can be. Sometimes it's worth it anyway. Thanks for listening to my story. I took my daughter's phone to my old friend, a technician, to have it repaired. He suddenly pulled me aside, his face pale, and whispered, "Cancel all your cards immediately. Change your passwords and get out of here." I was surprised. "What happened?" He turned the phone screen toward me. "And before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and let us know where you're listening in the comments." The kitchen fell silent the moment I stepped through the door. Emily and Kevin had been huddled over the counter, speaking in those urgent whispers that people use when they're planning something they shouldn't. But the second they heard my keys in the lock, they sprang apart like guilty teenagers caught smoking behind the school. "Dad," Emily's smile was so forced it could have cracked porcelain. "How was the doctor?" "Fine. Blood pressure's good." I set my jacket on the chair, watching them. Kevin had his phone clutched in his hand. Screen dark now, but his thumb was still hovering over it like he'd just locked it in a hurry. Emily was nervously tucking her hair behind her ear, a tell she'd had since childhood whenever she was hiding something. "That's great," she said too brightly, then barely pausing for breath. "Hey, Dad, I have a huge favor to ask." "My phone." She held up her iPhone, and I could see the spiderweb of cracks across the screen. "I dropped it this morning, and I really need it for work. Could you take it to your friend Daniel, the repair guy you always talk about?" I looked at the phone, then at her face. There was something in her eyes I couldn't quite place. Anxiety? Desperation? "Sure, honey, I can drop it off tomorrow." Actually, Kevin stepped forward, and I caught a flash of impatience in his expression before he smoothed it over. "She really needs it back as soon as possible. Like today, if you could. Some important work stuff coming up." It was barely 2:30 in the afternoon. "I suppose I could go now." "Thank you." Emily practically shoved the phone into my hands. "You're the best." "The best?" "Right. I'd heard that a lot over the years, usually when they needed something." That evening, dinner was a masterclass in discomfort. I'd made my specialty, pot roast with vegetables, the same meal I used to make every Sunday when Emily was young. She barely touched it. Kevin, my son-in-law, ate mechanically while scrolling through his laptop with his free hand. "You know, Richard," Kevin said without looking up, "this whole cooking every night thing, it's very quaint. But most people our age just use meal delivery services." "Most people your age don't have someone cooking for them for free," I replied, keeping my tone light. He finally glanced at me, and I saw that familiar flicker of condescension in his eyes. "I'm just saying the world's moved on. Paper bills, cooking from scratch, keeping everything in filing cabinets. It's all very 20th century. Emily jumped in quickly. "Kevin just means that technology makes things easier, Dad. That's all." "Right, easier." I took a bite of pot roast. It was actually quite good, if I did say so myself. "How's the job search going, Kevin?" His jaw tightened. He'd been between opportunities for about 8 months now. "I've got some leads. Nothing concrete yet. I'm sure something will turn up." I didn't mention that those leads never seemed to materialize, or that I'd been covering their share of groceries and utilities for longer than I cared to calculate. After dinner, I sat in the living room, my living room, in the house I'd bought 30 years ago, when mortgage rates were through the roof, and I'd worked double shifts to make the payments. The leather armchair still bore the indent from where I'd sat thousands of evenings, reading the paper, doing crosswords, living my life. Now I sat there like a guest in my own home, On the mantel were photographs. The Emily as a gap to 7-year-old, holding up a fish we'd caught on our camping trip. Emily at her college graduation beaming with pride. Emily and Kevin's wedding where she'd whispered, "I'm so happy, Dad," as we walked down the aisle. When had everything changed? I picked up the photo from her graduation. I'd been so proud that day. My daughter, the first in our family to get a degree. I'd worked extra hours, saved every penny I could to help with her tuition. She'd hugged me so tight and promised she'd make me proud. Now she couldn't meet my eyes at dinner. I heard them upstairs, their voices muffled but urgent. Not arguing exactly, but discussing something intense. Planning something. The floorboards creaked as one of them paced back and forth. I looked at Emily's cracked phone sitting on the coffee table where I'd left it. I should have taken it to Daniel right away, but something had stopped me. Some instinct I couldn't name. The house felt cold tonight despite the Florida heat outside. Cold in a way that had nothing to do with temperature. This was my home, the place where I'd raised Emily after her mother passed, where every room held memories. But lately it felt like I was the outsider here. They'd moved in 5 years ago, just for a couple of months, Dad, until we find our own place. That's what Emily had said. I'd just retired from my accounting firm, and honestly, I'd welcomed the company. The house had felt too empty after decades of living alone. But months had turned into years, and somewhere along the way, I'd stopped being a father they loved and started being an obstacle they tolerated. I ran my thumb over the cracked screen of Emily's phone. Tomorrow, I'd take it to Daniel. Tonight, I'd sit in my chair and wonder when I'd become a stranger in my own life. I couldn't sleep that night. Around 2 in the morning, I found myself back in the living room, this time pulling out the old photo albums from the cabinet. Maybe I was being sentimental, or maybe I was trying to pinpoint exactly when things had shifted. 5 years ago, when Emily and Kevin had arrived with their suitcases and hopeful smiles, I'd been genuinely happy. I'd spent the previous 2 years rattling around this 4-bedroom house by myself, and the idea of having family close again had warmed something in me that had been cold since my wife died. That first month had been wonderful. We'd had dinners together every night, real dinners, with conversation and laughter. Emily would tell me about her marketing job, Kevin about his plans for a startup. They'd ask about my retirement, my golf game, the garden I was planning. We'd watch movies on Friday nights. The 3 of us crowded on the couch with popcorn like Emily and I used to do when she was young. I remember the exact moment I started to feel the shift. It was about 6 months in. I'd come home from the grocery store and found Kevin in my study sitting at my desk with my filing cabinet open. Papers were spread across the surface. Bank statements, insurance documents, my will. "What are you doing?" I'd asked, trying to keep my voice level. He jumped slightly, then recovered with that easy smile. "Oh, hey, Richard. Emily mentioned you were having trouble organizing your tax documents. I thought I'd help out. I used to do some bookkeeping in college. It had seemed reasonable at the time, helpful even, so I'd let it go. But now looking back, I remembered the way he'd quickly shuffled the papers together. The way his explanation had come just a beat too quickly. The way Emily had been oddly insistent that I didn't need to hire an accountant that year, that Kevin could help out. Then there was the incident about a year ago with the bank statement. I'd been cleaning out the mail basket and found a credit card statement addressed to me from a company I'd never done business with. The balance was $3,475. I'd stared at it, confused, then taken it to Emily. "Dad, that's so weird," she'd said, barely glancing at it. "Must be identity theft or something. Happens all the time these days. I'll call the bank for you and get it sorted out. I can call them myself." No. I know how much you hate being on hold with customer service. Plus, I deal with this stuff at work all the time. Let me handle it." She'd taken the statement from my hands and promised to take care of it. I never saw it again. And when I asked about it a week later, she'd assured me it was all handled, just a computer glitch. I'd believed her because I wanted to believe her, because she was my daughter, and I loved her. And the alternative that she was lying to me was unthinkable. But there had been other moments, too. Small things that hadn't seemed important at the time. 3 months ago, I'd walked into the kitchen and found Kevin photographing my driver's license, just helping Emily update the insurance. He'd said they needed a copy of all our IDs. Last month, I'd gotten a call from my bank about a password reset I hadn't requested. When I mentioned it to Emily, she'd said she'd accidentally used my email instead of hers and quickly fixed it. 2 weeks ago, I'd found an envelope on the counter addressed to me from a mortgage company. I'd almost opened it when Emily had snatched it away. "That's nothing, Dad. Just spam. They send these to everyone." Each incident alone had seemed innocent, but together they formed a pattern I'd been too trusting or too naive to see. I closed the photo album and stared at the ceiling. In the silence of 3-lined AM, the truth was harder to avoid. My daughter and her husband were hiding something from me. Something big enough to make them nervous. Something that involved my personal documents and my finances. The thing about being an accountant for 40 years is that you learn to spot discrepancies. Numbers that don't add up. Stories that don't quite match the ledgers. And right now, living in my own house, I was seeing discrepancies everywhere. Kevin hadn't worked in 8 months, yet I'd seen him with new shoes, a new watch. Emily had mentioned struggling with money, yet she'd just gotten her nails done and talked about wanting to redecorate their room. Where was the money coming from? I stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the quiet Orlando street. The house across from me, the Hendersons' place, was dark. Jerry Henderson and I used to have beers on Friday evenings, talking about retirement, fishing, grandkids we hoped to have someday. Then Jerry had passed away last year, and his kids had swooped in like vultures, selling the place within a month. His daughter hadn't even bothered to visit him in his last 6 months. But she'd sure shown up for the will reading. I'd thought then, at least Emily isn't like that. At least I raised her better. Had I, though? The realization came slowly, like water seeping through a crack. I wasn't just uncomfortable in my own home. I was afraid. Afraid of what I might discover if I looked too closely. Afraid that the daughter I loved, the little girl I'd raised alone after her mother died, the person I'd sacrificed everything for, afraid that she might be betraying me in ways I couldn't yet fully imagine. Tomorrow, I'd take the phone to Daniel. Tonight, I'd make a decision. I would stop being willfully blind. I would stop accepting convenient explanations. I would stop being the trusting fool they clearly thought I was. Because whatever was happening, whatever they were hiding, I was going to find out. And if my instincts were right, if my daughter and her husband were doing what I suspected, then they were about to learn something important. You don't spend 40 years balancing books and catching fraud without learning how to spot a scheme, and you don't get to be 67 years old by being someone's easy mark. I went back to bed with my jaw set and my mind clear. I still didn't know what I'd find at Daniel's shop tomorrow. But I knew one thing with absolute certainty. I was done pretending everything was fine. The game, whatever it was about to change. Daniel's repair shop sat on a quiet street in downtown Orlando, sandwiched between a dry cleaner and a coffee shop that made the best espresso in the city. I'd been coming here for years, first as his father's accountant, then as a friend, and finally as a customer who trusted him with everything from laptops to phones. The bell chimed as I pushed through the door. Daniel looked up from behind the counter, his reading glasses perched on his nose, and broke into a genuine smile, not the tight fake one I'd been getting at home. "Richard, good to see you, man. What brings you in?" I held up Emily's phone, my daughter's screen. She dropped it yesterday. "Ah." He took it from me, examining the spiderweb of cracks. "Yeah, I can fix this. Give me about an hour to run diagnostics and order the part if I need it." "Sounds good. I'll grab a coffee and come back." I spent the next 20 minutes at the shop next door, nursing an Americano and watching people pass by on the sidewalk. Normal people doing normal things, going to work, running errands, living lives that probably didn't involve their own children stealing from them. Then my phone rang. Daniel's name flashed on the screen. "Hey, that was fast, Richard." His voice was tight, urgent. You need to come back here now. My stomach dropped. What's wrong? Just please come now. I left my coffee half finished and was back at the shop in under 2 minutes. Daniel was waiting at the door. He locked it behind me and flipped the back in 15 minutes sign. Daniel, what the he cut me off, leading me to the back room where he did his more detailed work. Emily's phone lay on the workbench, screen facing up. Daniel ran a hand through his hair, clearly agitated. Look, I always run a virus scan before I do repairs. Standard procedure, right? Make sure there's no malware that might corrupt the new hardware. He picked up the phone. I found something. And Richard, you need to cancel your credit cards immediately. Change all your passwords. And honestly, you might want to call the police. The room tilted slightly. What are you talking about? He unlocked the phone. Apparently, he'd already bypassed the security and opened the photo gallery. I'm sorry you have to see this. The first image was a photograph of my passport. Clear, well-lit, every detail visible. He swiped to the next image. My social security card. Next, my driver's license front and back. Next, 3 different credit cards photographed from both sides. Next, bank statements with my account numbers clearly visible. Next, tax documents with my signature. And then the screenshot started. Text messages between 2 contacts saved as E and K. Credit app submitted. Should be approved by Friday. Perfect. The old man hasn't noticed anything yet. I told you he wouldn't. He's too trusting. 2 more months and we can move on the house. I found a realtor who'll work fast. We need to be careful. If he catches on before we're ready, he won't. He barely understands how to check his email. I read them all. Every single message. There were dozens, months of planning, scheming, discussing how to forge my signature digitally, which credit card companies had the easiest online applications, how much they could drain before I'd notice. Daniel stood beside me, silent. What could he say? My hands were shaking. I set the phone down carefully, afraid I might throw it against the wall. How long? My voice sounded strange to my own ears, distant. How long have they been doing this? Based on the timestamps, at least 6 months, maybe longer. Daniel's face was pale. Richard, I'm so sorry. I know she's your daughter, but this is identity theft, fraud. This is serious. 6 months, half a year of systematically photographing my documents, applying for credit in my name, planning to sell my house out from under me, all while living under my roof, eating my food, accepting my help. The old man hasn't noticed anything yet. I felt something cold settle in my chest. Not anger, not yet. Something colder, clearer. Can you make copies of everything? I asked. Already did. Backed up the whole phone to an encrypted drive. I figured, he hesitated. I figured you'd need evidence. Good thinking. I pulled out my own phone. I need to make some calls. The police station was only 10 minutes away. Detective Margaret Thompson arrived at the shop within the hour. A woman in her early 50s with sharp eyes and a non-nonsense demeanor. She looked at the evidence with increasing concern. Mr. Foster, I'm not going to sugarcoat this. Family fraud cases are complicated. We can investigate and we will. But proving intent can be difficult even with these messages. What about the applications? The credit cards opened in my name. We'll need to get records from the banks. It'll take time. And honestly, she met my eyes. Even with solid evidence, juries can be sympathetic to family members. Oh, they were just helping their father. That kind of thing. I understood what she wasn't saying. This was going to be messy, difficult, possibly unsuccessful. But we will investigate, she continued. I'll need you to file a formal report. We'll start pulling financial records, contacting the credit bureaus. We spent the next 2 hours at the station. I gave my statement, signed forms, authorized the police to access my financial information. The detective was thorough, professional, but I could see the sympathy in her eyes and I hated it. I didn't want sympathy. I wanted justice. By the time I left, the sun was setting. I sat in my car in the station parking lot and let myself feel it. The full weight of what Emily and Kevin had done. Not just the theft, the betrayal, the casual cruelty of those text messages, the old man. Like I was just some obstacle, some resource to be exploited. My daughter, the little girl I'd rocked to sleep, taught to ride a bike, put through college, The woman who'd promised at her wedding that she'd always loved me. She'd been robbing me blind for 6 months. And Kevin, that smug, condescending parasite who lived in my house and made jokes about my old-fashioned ways while photographing my documents and forging my signature. I started the car. Time to go home. Time to face them, knowing what I now knew, pretending I was still the clueless old man they thought I was. Because Detective Thompson was right. This was going to be complicated. But she'd also said something else, almost as an afterthought. Document everything from now on. Every interaction, every suspicious behavior. Build your case. Oh, I would document everything. Every lie, every manipulation, every condescending comment. They thought they were so clever. They thought I was too old, too trusting, too stupid to catch on. We'd see about that. I drove home slowly, my mind racing despite the careful pace. Numbers had always been my comfort zone. 40 years of accounting had trained me to see patterns, to find the story hidden in ledgers and receipts. Now my brain was doing what it did best, organizing, categorizing, connecting dots. The strange credit card statement from a year ago that Emily had handled. The bank password reset she'd claimed was an accident. Kevin photographing my driver's license for insurance. The mortgage company envelope she'd snatched away. Every incident now reframed through the lens of deliberate theft rather than innocent mistakes. The picture wasn't just clearer, it was damning. I pulled into the driveway. Their cars were both there. Of course they were. Where else would they be? They lived here rent-free in the house I'd worked myself half to death to buy. "Dad," Emily called from the kitchen as I entered. Too cheerful. "How did it go? Can Daniel fix the phone?" I hung my keys on the hook, the same hook I'd installed 30 years ago, and walked into the kitchen. They were both there, Emily at the counter slicing vegetables. Kevin at the table with his laptop. "He needs to order a part," I said calmly. "Said it'll be a week, maybe 2. Some special component has to come from overseas." Emily's face twitched, just the slightest frown before she recovered. "Oh, that's a long time." "Technology," I said with a shrug. You know how it is. These phones are so complicated now." Kevin didn't even look up from his screen. "Told you to just buy a new one." But no, you had to try to save money." The irony was almost funny. Kevin, who hadn't worked in 8 months lecturing about saving money while stealing mine, I made myself a sandwich and sat at the table watching them. Really watching them the way I should have been all along. Emily's hands were unsteady as she cut the vegetables. She kept glancing at Kevin, then at me, then back to her cutting board. Kevin's laptop screen was angled away from me, but I caught a glimpse of what looked like a spreadsheet, numbers in columns, calculating something. "Everything okay, Dad?" Emily asked. "You seem quiet." "Just tired. Long day." I took a bite of my sandwich. "Say, Kevin, I've been thinking about what you said the other night about selling the house." Kevin's fingers paused on the keyboard. "Oh yeah, maybe you're right. This place is getting to be a lot for one person." I watched his face carefully. "I mean, for one old person. You two probably aren't staying forever, right? Eventually you'll want your own place." Emily and Kevin exchanged a glance. Quick, but I caught it. "We're in no rush to leave," Emily said quickly. "We like being here with you." "Well, that's sweet, honey. But still, I've been thinking I should probably talk to a financial advisor. Get my affairs in order. You know, I'm not getting any younger." Kevin's attention was fully on me now. "That's actually smart thinking, Richard. Very responsible. Responsible from the man who'd been forging my signature for months. I might even update my will," I continued casually. "Make sure everything's clear, just in case." "Dad, don't talk like that," Emily said. But her eyes were bright with something that wasn't sadness. After dinner, I excused myself early. Upstairs, I closed my bedroom door and pulled out my phone. Daniel had given me a flash drive with all the evidence before I left. Now, I needed to figure out what to do with it. Detective Thompson had been clear. They'd investigate, but it would take time, weeks, maybe months, and family fraud was notoriously difficult to prosecute. But I hadn't spent 4 decades in accounting without learning a thing or two about building cases. Every audit I'd ever done had taught me the same lesson. Documentation was everything. Create a paper trail. Make the numbers irrefutable. I opened my laptop and created a new folder, Evidence. Then I started listing every suspicious incident I could remember dating back 5 years. The credit card, the bank calls, the photographed license, the insurance documents, the mysterious envelope. Alongside each incident, I noted what I'd been told at the time versus what I now knew. Told, technical bank error. Reality, fraudulent credit card in my name. Told, helping with insurance. Reality, photographing ID for identity theft. Told, just spam mail. Reality, mortgage refinancing application I never authorized. The list grew longer, pattern after pattern after pattern. My phone buzzed. A text from Daniel. "You okay, man?" I typed back. "Please, thanks for today, anytime. Let me know if you need anything." I stared at his message. Then I typed, "Actually, how long can you realistically delay that phone repair?" The response came quickly, "As long as you need. I can say the part's back ordered. Manufacturer delays, whatever. Week, 2 weeks. 2 weeks would be perfect." Done. I set the phone down and returned to my laptop. 2 weeks without Emily having access to her phone meant 2 weeks where she couldn't coordinate as easily with Kevin. 2 weeks where they'd be anxious, off balance. 2 weeks for me to prepare. I pulled up my bank accounts. All of them, including the ones I'd kept separate for years, the investments I'd made, the retirement fund I'd built. My assets totaled considerably more than Emily and Kevin probably realized. That credit card statement they'd manipulated, that $180,000 I'd accidentally mentioned once. They thought they knew my financial situation. They had no idea. A plan was forming, not just prosecution. Detective Thompson was right that convictions could be uncertain. But there were other kinds of justice. Financial justice, legal justice. The kind that came from understanding systems and using them properly. I'd spent my career finding discrepancies, catching fraud, protecting assets. Now I'd protect my own. Downstairs, I could hear Emily and Kevin talking in hushed voices, worried voices. They were probably trying to figure out how to proceed without her phone for 2 weeks. Good. Let them worry. I opened a new browser tab and searched for criminal defense attorneys in Orlando. Then I reconsidered and searched instead for attorneys who specialized in financial fraud cases, but on the prosecution side. I needed someone who understood how these schemes worked, who could anticipate their moves. Tomorrow, I'd start making calls. Detective Thompson had mentioned that building a solid case took time and strategy. Well, I had time. And after 40 years of building airtight audits, I certainly had strategy. Emily had called me the old man who wouldn't notice. Kevin had mocked my old-fashioned ways. They were about to learn that old-fashioned accounting principles still worked just fine. And one of the first principles I'd learned way back when I started, always balance your books. Every debit requires a credit. Every action has a consequence. They'd taken from me. Now it was time to calculate exactly what they owed. And I wasn't just thinking about money. I closed my laptop and lay back on the bed, staring at the ceiling. For the first time since seeing those photos on Emily's phone, I felt something other than shock or pain. I felt focused. They'd made a mistake underestimating me, and I was going to make absolutely certain they understood the full cost of that error. The next morning, over coffee that tasted like ash in my mouth, I played my role perfectly. "So, Dad," Emily said with studied casualness, "any update from Daniel?" I looked up from my newspaper. Yes, I still read actual newspapers, much to Kevin's amusement, and shrugged. "He called last night, needs to order a part from overseas. Could be a week, maybe 2. Emily's smile flickered just for a second, but I saw it. 2 weeks? You know how it is with these fancy smartphones. Everything's proprietary now. I turned back to my paper. I remember when phones were just phones. You dropped them. The plastic case cracked. You bought a new case for $5. Now it's like performing surgery. Kevin snorted from across the table. That's the problem with your generation, Richard. Always complaining about progress instead of adapting. I could have pointed out that his generation couldn't seem to adapt to the concept of paying rent or holding down a job, but I just smiled mildly. You're probably right, Kevin. The look he exchanged with Emily was priceless. Confusion mixed with satisfaction. They thought they were winning. Over the next few days, I became a student of their behavior. 40 years of auditing had taught me that people revealed themselves in patterns, and Emily and Kevin were practically screaming their guilt if you knew what to look for. Kevin spent hours on his laptop in the corner of the living room, angled so I couldn't see the screen, but I'd catch glimpses when I walked by. Spreadsheets, numbers, calculations, planning how to spend money that wasn't his. Emily made calls constantly. She'd say she was checking on work stuff and step outside. But through the window, I'd see her texting rapidly, her shoulders hunched with tension. They'd become secretive about everything. Their bedroom door was always locked now, they whispered in corners. They'd stop talking mid-sentence if I entered a room. The funny thing, they probably thought they were being subtle. On the third day after my discovery, I had my first meeting with Gerald Morris. Detective Thompson had given me his name. He specializes in financial fraud cases. Weth, she'd said, if anyone can help you build a bulletproof strategy, it's Gerald. His office was in a high-rise downtown, all glass and steel and expensive furniture that probably cost more than my first car. Gerald himself was in his late 50s with silver hair and the sharp eyes of someone who'd seen every scheme in the book. Mr. Foster, he shook my hand firmly. Detective Thompson, brief me on your situation. I've reviewed the evidence from the phone. It's comprehensive. Is it enough for criminal charges? Absolutely for conviction. He tilted his head. That depends. Juries can be unpredictable, especially in family cases. But what concerns me more is that you don't just want justice. You want something more, don't you? I sat back in the leather chair. I want them to understand what they did. Not just legally, but emotionally. I want them to feel the betrayal, the helplessness, the shock of having everything pulled out from under them, the way I felt when I saw those messages calling me the old man. Gerald nodded slowly. Then we need to be strategic. Criminal prosecution is one avenue, but we need to think bigger. Civil liability, asset protection. We need to make them feel the consequences in ways they'll understand. Financially, legally, socially. I'm listening. First, we need to let them continue. I know that sounds counterintuitive, but if we shut them down now, they can claim it was just one or two mistakes, impulse decisions. If we document a clear pattern of systematic fraud, over time, their intent becomes undeniable. You want me to watch them steal from me under controlled conditions? Yes, we'll work with Detective Thompson. Every fraudulent application, every forged signature, every credit line they open, it's all evidence. And more importantly, it's more debt they'll be responsible for when this is over. I thought about it. The accountant in me understood the logic. Document everything. Build an airtight case. Let them dig their own grave with spreadsheets and signatures. What else? Gerald pulled out a legal pad and started sketching out a plan. We need to protect your actual assets. New will, power of attorney with specific limitations, trusts if necessary. Make sure that no matter what they try legally, they can't touch your real money. They're planning to sell my house. Not if we file the right documents first. We'll create a revocable living trust, transfer the house into it. Even if they somehow get guardianship, which they won't, they can't touch trust property without going through specific legal channels that take months. By the time they realized what happened, it would be too late. I felt something I hadn't felt in days. Hope, not the desperate kind, but the cold, calculated kind that comes with a solid plan. There's one more thing, Gerald said, leaning forward. We need to think about civil damages. Criminal court might send them to jail, but civil court can make at them pay. Literally, emotional distress, attempted theft, fraud. We can build a substantial claim. How substantial? Based on what I'm seeing, easily 6 figures, maybe more, depending on what else we find. I left his office 3 hours later with a stack of documents to sign and a timeline for action. Gerald's paralegal would start filing paperwork immediately. The trust, the new will, the power of attorney restrictions, all of it would be in place within a week. That evening at dinner, Kevin was particularly smug. You know, Richard, Emily and I have been talking. We think you should consider getting a financial advisor, someone to help manage your accounts. Make sure you're not getting taken advantage of. The irony was so thick I could have cut it with my fork. That's thoughtful of you, Kevin, but I've managed my own finances for 40 years. I think I'm okay. That's exactly the point, Dad. Emily's voice was sticky with false concern. You've been doing it for so long. Maybe it's time to let someone else take some of the burden. We worry about you. They worried about me, right? They worried I might notice the fraudulent credit cards before they could drain them completely. I'll think about it, I said, and watched them exchange another one of those looks. Later that night, alone in my room, I reviewed Gerald's plan again. It was elegant in its completeness. Every angle covered, every loophole closed, every trap set. They thought they were the hunters. They thought they'd found an easy mark in their aging father, who still read paper newspapers and didn't understand modern technology. What they didn't understand was that technology might change, but human nature doesn't. Greed is still greed. Fraud is still fraud. And consequences, well, consequences are timeless. I pulled out my phone and texted Gerald. I'm in, let's do this. His response came immediately. Remember, you need to maintain that poker face. Can you do that? I smiled at the screen and typed back, I've been practicing for 40 years. The game was on, and this time I knew all the rules. Detective Thompson came to the house on a Tuesday afternoon while Emily and Kevin were out. She'd called ahead, making sure they wouldn't be home. In her hands was a manila folder that looked deceptively thin for the bomb it contained. Coffee? I offered. Please. She settled into the kitchen chair and opened the folder. Richard, the bank forensics came back. It's worse than we thought. I poured us both coffee and sat down. How much worse? 3 credit cards opened in your name. Total available credit, $45,000. 2 personal loans totaling $30,000. What? And here's the kicker. There's a pending application for a cash-out refinance on this house. If it had gone through, they would have extracted about $200,000 in equity. My hands tightened on the coffee mug. $200,000. Nearly everything I'd built over 30 years of work. How much have they actually spent so far? About $20,000. The rest is still available credit. They've been careful spacing out the charges so nothing would trigger fraud alerts. Mostly cash advances and wire transfers. She slid some documents across the table. Every signature is forged. Digital signatures created from scans of your real signature from other documents. I studied the paperwork, the applications, the loan documents, the credit card agreements, all bearing my name, none bearing my actual consent. The handwriting expert confirmed it, I asked. Confirmed. These are sophisticated forgeries, but forgeries nonetheless. Richard, with this evidence, we have them cold. Identity theft, financial fraud, forgery, multiple felonies. We could arrest them today. No. The word came out harder than I intended. Not yet. Thompson raised an eyebrow. Your attorney explained the strategy. He did. Let them continue under surveillance. Build the pattern, make the case undeniable. It's risky. Every day we wait, they could do more damage. Control damage, I corrected. Gerald is setting up protection for my real assets. Let them think they're winning. Let them get comfortable, and let them hang themselves with more evidence. She nodded slowly. Your call. But Richard, be careful. Cornered animals can be dangerous. After she left, I sat at the kitchen table for a long time, staring at those forged signatures, each one a betrayal, each one proof that my daughter had looked at me and seen only an ATM machine with a heartbeat. The front door opened around 4. Emily and Kevin back from wherever they'd been. Dad, Emily called out. You home, kitchen? I replied. They came in carrying shopping bags, new clothes. I noticed expensive brands bought with money stolen from me, though they didn't know I knew that yet. We were thinking, Kevin said, settling into a chair with that casual arrogance of his. Maybe it's time we talked about long-term plans for the house. What about it? Well, it's a big place. 4 bedrooms, that huge yard, lot of maintenance for one person. He leaned back completely at ease. Have you thought about downsizing? Maybe one of those nice retirement communities. Emily jumped in. We're not trying to push you out, Dad. We just want you to be comfortable. And financially, it might make sense. Free up some equity. Reduce your expenses. I looked at them, really looked at them. Emily with her new designer purse. Kevin with his confident smirk. Both of them so certain they had me fooled. You know, I said slowly. You might be right. I have been thinking about my financial situation lately. Kevin perked up. Really? Mm-hmm. In fact, I've been reviewing all my accounts, making sure everything's in order, updating my will, that sort of thing. The change in them was instantaneous. Emily's smile froze. Kevin's eyes sharpened with something that might have been alarm. Your will? Emily's voice was carefully controlled. Is everything okay? Are you sick? No, nothing like that, just being responsible. At my age, you never know. I stood and started cleaning my coffee mug. I actually met with a lawyer last week, Gerald Morris. He specializes in estate planning. The silence behind me was deafening. I could practically feel their panic. That's good. Kevin finally managed. Smart thinking. I thought so. He's helping me set up some trusts, reorganize my assets, making sure everything's protected and properly allocated. I turned to face them, keeping my expression mild. He said, I've been leaving myself vulnerable to potential fraud. Apparently, identity theft is a big problem for seniors these days. Emily's face had gone pale, not dramatically. She was better at controlling herself than Kevin, but I saw the color drain from her cheeks. Her hand moved to her phone in her pocket, an unconscious gesture. Kevin, on the other hand, couldn't quite manage his expression. His jaw tightened. His eyes darted to Emily, then back to me. The shopping bags in his hands crinkled as his grip tightened. Identity theft, he said. That's serious, very serious. Gerald said that family members are often the most vulnerable to it. People trust their relatives, don't protect their information properly. I opened the dishwasher and placed my mug inside. Anyway, he's setting up all sorts of protections. New passwords, alerts on all my accounts, security measures. Said it'll make it nearly impossible for anyone to access my information without my explicit permission. Emily and Kevin stood frozen in the kitchen doorway. I could see their minds racing, calculating, trying to figure out if I knew if this was a coincidence or a declaration of war. Well, Emily said finally, her voice too high. That sounds very thorough, Dad. I thought so. Oh, and Daniel called. Your phone's ready. You can pick it up tomorrow. If possible. Emily went even paler. Her phone with all the evidence. She didn't know Daniel had already copied everything, that the police had every message, every photo. That's great, she whispered. That's really great. They excused themselves shortly after that, claiming they had errands to run. I watched them go, saw Kevin's hand on Emily's back, guiding her quickly out the door. Through the window, I could see them in the driveway having an intense whispered argument before finally getting in the car and driving away. I pulled out my phone and texted Detective Thompson. They're spooked. Just mentioned the lawyer and new security measures. You should see increased activity on the account soon. Her response was almost immediate. We're watching. Every move is being documented. I leaned against the counter and let myself smile. Really smile. For the first time since this nightmare began, the look on Kevin's face when I'd mentioned fraud protection, the way Emily's hand had flown to her phone, the panic poorly disguised as casual concern. It was better than any spreadsheet I'd ever balanced. They were rattled now, uncertain. They'd thought they had months to execute their plan. Now they'd be rushing, making mistakes, leaving more evidence. Perfect. 2 weeks crawled by like years. By Emily asked about her phone almost daily. Each inquiry more anxious than the last. Still no word from Daniel? She'd asked, trying to sound casual and failing. These things take time, honey, I'd reply, not looking up from my crossword puzzle. International shipping, you know. On the 15th day, I called her into the living room. Good news, Daniel just called. Your phone's ready. You can pick it up today. The relief that flooded her face was almost comical. She and Kevin exchanged one of their meaningful glances, the kind they thought I didn't notice, and I saw her shoulders drop as tension drained away. That's great, Dad. I'll go get it right now. Take your time, I said mildly. He's there until 6. She was out the door in under 5 minutes. That evening, I sat in my usual chair in the living room, reading or pretending to read. Anyway, Emily and Kevin had retreated to their room, and their voices drifted down through the old house's thin walls. Finally, Kevin's voice louder than he probably intended. I thought that old fool had lost it. Shh, Emily hissed. He'll hear you. He's half deaf anyway, Kevin replied. Look, we need to move fast now. The phone was out of commission for 2 weeks. We're behind schedule. Their voices dropped to urgent whispers. I couldn't make out the words, but the tone was clear enough. Desperation, greed, calculation. I sat very still, hands clenched on my book, and reminded myself that Detective Thompson was watching, that every move they made from here on out was being documented, that justice was coming. But it didn't make it hurt any less. The next morning, I executed the next phase of Gerald's plan. We on the kitchen counter, seemingly forgotten. I left a bank statement, not from one of my regular accounts. They already knew about those. This was from an investment account I'd maintained for years, one I'd never mentioned. The balance showed $180,000. I went out to the garden, ostensibly